everybody can execute on a good day. When you wake up and you're like, man, I got perfect rest. I don't even need a cup of coffee. You're sprinting out to start your workout. It's good. We're not worried about trying to get somebody to execute on a good day. It's how do we get people to execute on a shitty day when the chips are not falling where they need to be.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Casazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. Today's guest is a retired Green Beret with over 2 decades of service, including time as a Special Forces commander, a strategic planner, and even a Mandarin student at the Defense Language Institute. Now he's leading employee whole health and well-being for the Phoenix Veteran Association, helping over 4,000 staff members and 150 veterans live fuller lives. He's a husband, a father, a mindset coach, and someone who believes we grow by doing hard things with a smile on our face. Ladies and gentlemen, Dustin Delcoure. Dustin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Oh, of course. So I usually go with the what drew you to being a Green Beret in the first place kind of question, and you were in it for a very long time. But I have to ask, as someone who is a planner, what is it like being a strategic planner? And do you have anything for civilians in terms of, because I'll tell you, I have a lot of friends and family members who are all like, I wing it. And I just my blood boils at the wing it thing. So I got to get some advice from a strategic planner, especially in the civilian world.
I'll give you a couple tidbits. One, as they always say, no plan survives first contact. So you shouldn't expect it to go perfect because that's not how life works and that's not how any plan's going to work either. I don't know if there's a secret sauce. Yeah, we have a framework that we use for military planning, but I think what really brings together any plan that has a solid outcome is the team that you put together to execute the plan. And so a lot of things that I'll talk about, some of the things I'll talk about today, kind of 2 areas that I really get into are relationships and resilience. And they tie together really well. Happy to do a deeper dive in that here in a bit. The group of people, the context of the team that you put together has a lot to do with the capacity to create a good product and for it to be executable. And so, yes, the framework that you use for planning, the military's got a pretty good long-standing system, but I would argue the secret sauce is really bringing kind of multi-dimensional adaptive group of people together, because when you've got different perspectives, different experience, different education, different cultures, when you plug all those multi-dimensional pieces in, you can see things from different angles, and those different perspectives allow you to create a plan that is adaptive to other perspectives, and it helps you have a better outcome.
What do you think is the best way to, because you talk about team, and as you're saying team, I'm like, oh, geez, I run a nonprofit. My team volunteer. Really hard sometimes to get volunteers, like following through, especially when their life and job get in the way. And businesses too, they have some businesses have high turnovers. What would you say is a good, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase the question. Pretty much what I'm trying to ask is, how do you put together a good team? Or how do you know that the team is going to be, good? It's going to be a good one. So
the first thing I would look at is, what does the team need to do? What does this team need to accomplish? Because if are there unique skills, or are there unique skills, abilities, characteristics, experience, if you look at whatever you need to execute on and you reverse engineer that, then that's going to help you to look for people that have the capacity to do some of the different things that you need to be done. And there's, of course, the known unknowns, and you might have some unknown unknowns that you need adaptive capacity to, but it also depends on if you're going to do a really rote, repeatable task, that's trainable, versus something that's a lot more ambiguous, and you need to have people that have a set of skills that can adapt to an ambiguous environment, if that makes sense. So it really, I would say it depends a lot on what mission you're going to accomplish, and even what pieces of that mission. The more that you can understand that, then you could go and look for someone that has either the capacity to be trained to do that, or has a good fit for that role. And when you look at I'm not going to speak for the whole special operations community, unless they've changed something real recently, the way that the Special Forces assessment works is they went and they looked at high performers in the Green Berets and they looked at the characteristics that those people had. And then they used a system called the Assessment Center methodology. There's some other frameworks that went into it. Don't want to go too deep, but that's kind of the approach they took. They said, hey, what are the attributes of the people that have done this job really effectively? And then let's go and see if we can find some people that have those attributes. And in that case, a lot of it is getting people who are trainable within the direction you need to train them to complete that mission and then adapt in that environment. That's where I'll start, is looking, understanding what you're going to do, and then seeing, kind of reverse engineering that and saying, okay, how can I go and find people that fill that niche? Then I'll get into depending on which direction we take this, I can, as I start talking about relationships and people, knowing your people has a lot to do with that, regardless of what mission you're executing. If you're bringing somebody onto the team, understanding kind of their personal situation and what they bring to the table, skills, characteristics, abilities, those play a lot as well. Because let's say if somebody's got a family situation or a limitation or a unique thing that's going on and you don't have awareness of that, then you don't have the ability to support them effectively. And sometimes you can see that show up in someone's lack of performance. And it ends up being an area that if you're aware of and you can support them, they can really become a solid player for you.
I'm deep in this. Let's keep going. and then we'll go. I'm curious. And especially as you mentioned, the relationship resilience thing. Let's keep going.
Okay. So I'll have this is just Dustin's own kind of 4 key themes that I like to share. And so those themes, I'll get into how this ties to the team. If you give me a sec to walk us through a little bit. So there's 4 themes that I think are pretty relevant. This connects with a couple of things: getting to know yourself and getting to know your people or your team. Whatever that, your people could be your family, could be your teammates in your nonprofit, could be who you need to interact with. And so that the first one is mindfulness. Paying attention on purpose in the moment, non-judgmentally. I deal with folks from a real wide spectrum. And so some are like super like non-hippie, not like, that sounds too hippie-ish, it's leafy. Others are more practical, kind of full spectrum, like, hey, look, it's just practical. It's paying attention to the things that are important to you for reasons that are important to you. And when you find that your mind is elsewhere, kind of having some awareness of that and bringing it back on point, that's just super practical. If you're out there wandering focus-wise, then you're not moving the needle on what's important to you. And realistically, there are a lot of other positive benefits to it, health and well-being and performance. But bottom line is that's one piece of my kind of framework, mindfulness. Highly encourage people to invite people to take a shot at it. All it takes is 1 minute paying attention to your breath. If you're like me, your mind will wander. About 2 seconds into that, you'll have to nudge it back in. You build some mental muscle every time you nudge it back in. If you never look to see if your mind's wandering, then you never get to bring it back, and you don't get to build that muscle bringing it back onto the task. So mindfulness, paying attention on purpose in the moment, non-judgmentally, super practical. Highly invite folks to check it out. Next is purpose. Everybody can execute on a good day. When you wake up and you're like, man, I got perfect rest. I don't even need a cup of coffee. You're sprinting out to start your workout. It's good. We're not worried about trying to get somebody to execute on a good day. It's how do we get people to execute on a shitty day when the chips are not falling where they need to be. Knowing where you draw your sense of purpose is a highly valuable asset when you have a rough day. Because when you have a reason to get out of bed on that crappy day, whether it's a rainy day or your joints are hurting, or we can think of any measure of complexities that you encounter. When you know why you're getting out of bed, what gives you a sense of purpose, and you can dig deeper on that gives you horsepower to start maneuvering the rough day. And it's like there's a video that I really like. It's got this older guy on with a kettlebell, and you can see he can barely move, and he starts picking the kettlebell up, and it kind of takes through a progression of him. It's like a 70-year-old guy lifting this kettlebell, and it's like, what's going on? Fast forward to Christmas. His granddaughter comes over, he goes over to the granddaughter's house for Christmas, and he brings a box, opens it up, and it's got the star on top of the Christmas tree. So his little granddaughter it's assumed to be the granddaughter, opens this box from the grandfather, and it's a little star for the Christmas tree. And he picks her up and he holds her up in the air so she can fix the Christmas tree or the star to the top of the Christmas tree. But the point is, like, it's like, hey, here's an older gentleman who was not in good shape, had some movement issues, but he created this visualization of like, I'm going to give this star to my granddaughter, and I'm going to lift her up, so she can put that star on the Christmas tree. Point is, that's real. When you can visually, kind of say like, this is this is what I'm here for, to be a granddad. And you can peel the onion layers. I would argue the more that you peel the onion layers on who you are, the more you're going to have the capacity to dig into it when you're having a tough time. Like people, they end up going to soft selections or training courses, ranger school, whatever, and you see people, I personally did in my own situation, like they're like, they're halfway through, they've already done a lot of the really difficult stuff, and they're like, no, my family, I can't leave my family behind, or I can't, where they make up an excuse where they have to go. When you have that purpose and you look at your own kind of situation and how it's connected to it, when you encounter those roadblocks and you're like, I don't know if I want to be here, you go back and you say like, oh, I know I want to be here. This is it. Mm-hmm. So, and if you look at some of the theories, like self-determination theory, this is really connected to that. Essentially, it's the psychological theory that looks at intrinsic internal motivation. And it's got a lot more horsepower compared to external, like carrot stick motivation. And so essentially, when we can do that, we peel the onion layers, you tap into your own internal intrinsic motivation. It's something that helps kind of build that foundation for you to navigate a tough situation. And of course, reps matter. The more you can visualize that, think about it, that's a good thing. So next, there's purpose kind of, and you could, we could dig deeper, look into values, look into other, that also can change throughout your life. It's not fixed. You might have something that might be different when you're 50 than when you were 30, but revisiting it, kind of keeping that thing fresh, highly recommend. The next one, which is really probably my favorite, and this is where the relationships and the resilience start to connect a bit, is context. Context matters. And if we're looking at a team, there's a couple halves of it. The first half is the context of like, what's the human situation for your teammate? What does their family situation look like? Where were they educated? Where did they grow up? Where have they traveled? And so if you have a teammate, let's say they've got a Hispanic culture and they've got a daughter who's coming of age and they're going to have a quinceañera, or in the Philippines, we call it like debut, or if you're going to have a bar mitzvah if you're Jewish, or a lot of cultures have these, coming of age. My point is, there's all kinds of life events. Maybe your grandparent has cancer, or you've got a child that's graduating from kindergarten. There are one-time life events that are important to people, that are meaningful for their well-being and their family's connectivity and all that. And so if you don't take the time to get to know the context of that teammate, and it, kind of depends on what your team is, you might have different variations of that in your life, then you can't support somebody for that event that they've got coming up. And so one is being able to, support somebody for unique situations, and those can be all over the place. This is where I say, like process, policy, regulation, those things are organizationally important, and they're maybe more important in some organizations than less, but there's a space in between policy, process, regulation, and mission accomplishment. And that space the leader fills. And the leader fills, that's what you get to with mission execution. The leader understanding kind of that, what's the unique situation. There's no manual at your organization, even if you work in a bureaucracy, there's no manual that says what you do for a quinceañera. There's no manual that says, well, you have to do this for third grade graduation for someone's kid. A simple example of the messier space that the leader needs to be adaptive enough to fill on their own. And so, a lot of people are hesitant. It's a double-edged sword. You ask people, you learn that stuff. But yes, if you're going to be a leader or a good teammate, you're going to have to work through the difficulty of, now that I know about this person's situation, I'm going to need to work with that as an effective teammate and a leader to get good outcomes. So there's one, the personal kind of side of that, and like their life stuff that they have going on, if that makes sense. The other side of context is the, like, what do they bring to the table? Experience, skills, abilities, etc. I'll give you an example. Like, was working with some healthcare folks, have a nurse practitioner who was an anthropologist, have a physician that I've worked with recently who was an engineer. So if we're doing a facility upgrade, I'm looking at new clinical spaces where a doctor is going to work. If I know that I've got a physician who's has high depth of experience and knowledge as a physician, who's spent 10 years doing structural related engineering and then had a career change, that's a pretty unique level of insight that I would want to have on my team. When I'm looking at those plans, hey, do we have an engineer who can think like a doctor, or vice versa? You know what I'm saying? So if you never took the time to speak with your team and understand some of those unique experiences, you don't get to bring those into play. And so as a leader, you want to have all the kind of input that you can have, good input that you can use to make effective decisions. And so if you never, a lot of people won't come up and they're not going to share that information with you. And so I would argue and highly encourage people to have those kind of genuine human interactions and conversations so that they get to learn. And that's a two-way deal. There's reciprocity. You share some things about yourself. You learn some things about your teammates. Then these things, now like I mentioned, had a nurse practitioner who was an anthropologist. So in the field, working overseas in foreign countries, this particular person had someone in their field team had a medical emergency, and that kind of got them interested in health. They later became a provider. But the point is, that person is trained to look at how humans interact with their environment. That could be highly relevant to whether it's a team-based situation or maybe a unique clinical scenario where you've got some environmental dynamics that you need somebody who can kind of help you look at it and help treat the patient in a unique way. My point is, seeing this time and time again, folks have these really unique backgrounds. It's really up to the leader. And I always say, you don't have to be a supervisor to be a leader. You don't have to be in a leadership position to act like a leader. Sometimes you have to lead up and kind of demonstrate that environment to others. But if you are a supervisor or in a position, you certainly need to be executing and acting like a leader. So I'll give you another example. When I was getting into my master's research stuff on cross-cultural interpersonal skills, was talking with a guy who was a Marine officer, had been in Iraq, and they were handling logistical stuff, and they were handing out food. I want to say it was corn or rice to a large population in a contentious area. So got a lot of insurgents, a lot of unruly people, also a lot of people that haven't had access to like basic resources. So they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're scared because there's a war going on around them. And they're handing out, they've got all these trucks with food on them. And of course, everyone's running to the trucks to like, give me food. And it's getting crazy. And they kind of froze, and they said like, we weren't sure what to do. And they had their most junior Marine that was sitting there with them. He said, give me the bullhorn. He just took the bullhorn from one of the captain or the major, grabbed the interpreter, and he said, tell everybody to sit down on the ground or we won't give them the food. So the interpreter says, hey, sit down on the ground if you want to get your food. And they're like, what the hell was that? And he said, I grew up in the juvenile penitentiary system. We used to cause havoc in our system. Whenever things went off the rails, the guys that ran the program, guys and gals, I don't know if it was corrections officer or whatnot, he said they would have us sit down and immediately gave them control of the situation. And he's like, I was on the other end of it then, but he said it worked pretty damn well. And so point being, that was the junior guy on the ground in a tumultuous situation. The senior folks didn't know what to do. Fortunately, he took charge. They deferred to it and it worked. But the point is, you never know, get to know the people in your team. You don't make assumptions. Here's the phrase that I think is a really valuable one. A lot of people are talking about empathy and the importance of empathy. It's critical. But the point that you need to connect with if you're going to dive into empathy is only as good as its accuracy. If I make assumptions about who you are as a person, a teammate, a customer, a human, whatever, if those assumptions are 180 degrees away from reality, that's going to cause me a problem. It may pour gas on the fire. It may, impact mission accomplishment. You can look at it in a lot of different ways, so really I encourage people to look at tools that they can incorporate to accurize their empathy, because that's really what it's about. If you care about empathy, but you're kind of not getting an accurate result, an accurate perception of what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, then you're not really executing on it, and it's not going to be valuable for you. So that's the context. Kind of know your people on the personal side, know your people on kind of what they bring to the table. And it could be, this person speaks a different language, they've traveled here, they have a unique skill set. The other thing I'll say about that is, if you hire 5 people with the same skill set, they're not all going to be the same. One person might be highly technical. One person might be really good. And like, if you look at healthcare, like one person may be really good at certain hands-on clinical interventions. Another person might be really good at technical stuff, but not as good at some of the other hands-on stuff. The way that you even train a team, this translates to how you would train. If you're going to do training, you want to understand where somebody's at to get them to the next level. Are you familiar with the concept, with the theory of self-efficacy?
No.
Okay, so it's another pretty important theory for mental performance, and just kind of it's essentially the definition is confidence in your ability to achieve a task or goal. So it's kind of like
Okay.
confidence, but self-efficacy is the reference. And so if you take somebody and you improve their self-efficacy in an area, then they will, when it increases their confidence in like tasks. So if it's like a sporting event or biking and you're going to do some other kind of sporting related events, if you can teach them a skill and they can level up in that area, then their confidence to be able to do similar items, similar activities is going to go up. And typically, if someone's self-efficacy improves in one area, you'll get some positive value, like they'll be more confident to take on any new task, but it's stronger in the area that they had the success in. The importance is, if you use this like a swimming pool analogy, if we're going to bring you to a pool and teach you to swim, or look at kind of enhancing your swimming skill, if you can float and you're not afraid of being in the water, but your strokes aren't really that well, you can't move in the water, maybe I'm going to put you in the deep end, or because you're already comfortable off your feet. You can float, you can manage your buoyancy. So we're going to work on some movement stuff, and kind of how to position yourself in the water, how to move your hands, whatever. That's great. But if you've never been in the water before, maybe we're going to have you put your face in the water. We're going to show you some buoyancy where you can put your feet down. We're going to start at a different level. If I put that person who has never been in the water, maybe is afraid of water, and I just threw them in the deep end and then they nearly drowned and you had to pull them out, or just they got really scared, a strong failure like that will take someone's self-efficacy downward. It's one of those things where if you knowing your people, if you're going to bring in training and help to develop them, knowing where somebody is at helps you to create a training environment. You want to be able to do stuff that levels up, that's harder than you're currently doing. But if you take someone and you give them a task that's, if they're like 1 to 10, it's easy, 1 is easy, 10's hard. If you're at a 1 and I give you a 10, that's like kicking you down and putting you in a position where your self-efficacy is going to go downward, and it's going to reduce your confidence. And that's not what you want to do to build a good teammate. If someone's at a 1, you might want to frame them up for a task that's a 2. And what's interesting is some people, sometimes to that person, the 2 might look like it's a 10, but if you kind of understand the environment, you can shape it so that it's really like a 99% success rate. You can tee somebody up for a successful 2 when they feel like it's a 10, and they get a really good confidence boost. And now they're ready to move up to the next level quicker. So if that makes sense, context wise, kind of that also helps you develop people. It also helps you, if you look at it for yourself, if I'm working with folks that are going to do, like, let's say, a soft selection, this is when you look at the increasingly difficult environmental dynamics. So if you're going to do, let's say, land navigation, if you've never done land navigation, then we're going to start out in like the most simple. Maybe you're walking the roads and going for intersections, and then we add in some terrain, and then you add complexity, and that builds that self-efficacy in a meaningful manner. So you're not going to put somebody out that doesn't know how to read a map and compass at night in the rain, carrying 50 pounds, and be like, good luck, Chuck. That's not going to work. But it seems so simple, Gina, but people they want to do hard stuff, and they get out and they, instead of paying attention and being respectful for the fact that I'm a 1, and having a little humility and saying, hey, I can go and talk to somebody else who's got some more experience in this, start out at the 1 or 2 level. We want you to do hard stuff, but we also, I'm not looking to send people's self-efficacy in the wrong way. It's good to kind of ratchet things up. And then if you build some reps doing difficult things, when you start to build some reps and you increase that self-efficacy, where you kind of slowly add some layers onto your environmental difficulty, then it creates more capacity to have a fail. If you've never had any successes, you need a few of those kind of wins to bolster your confidence and your self-efficacy. And that can be in some increasingly difficult environments. And it also builds kind of some muscle memory, some awareness of your environment. You have a little more capacity to fall on your face and get back up. So those reps build a baseline for you to then be able to kind of bring in more failure and have enough mental capacity to learn, to be able to say, I can go in and learn from this failure and take a growth mindset approach. And the biggest way to build self-efficacy is by doing an action. You can also build it by vicarious learning. So let's say, if we're doing land navigation, I'm going to show Gina how to do land navigation. I give you a class and maybe we walk together and you watch me do it. That's another way to build self-efficacy, and it's a pretty good one. But the best one is you then taking the skills I've shown you and doing it yourself. That's the best way to get
Right.
it. The next one is the attaboy, the encouragement, hey, Gina, you're doing a good job. You got to your first land navigation point, whatever. That's another way to do it. And then there's like the kind of physiological, the feeling, the arousal that you get body wise. So, I mean, really, if you look at those things, like that's another aspect of knowing your teammate. And then if you're going to set them up to mentor them and develop them, knowing that you can use some of these levers in a positive sense to help to get them to the next level. Like, okay, let's train you this skill, see where you're at. Let's train you in this. We'll look at how we can kind of add some difficulty layers onto it to increase the difficulty of the environment. But I'm also going to show it to you, and then I'm going to give you some encouragement while you're doing it so you can stack these relatively simple things. If your baseline's good, to build somebody to a better kind of place, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. I want to ask you in terms of the same thing, but a little different. Like I was talking to a couple of nonprofits. I get together with a couple of nonprofits in the area to share our wins, learn from each other, things like that. And I said, I'm getting these volunteers, and I run a nonprofit that increases literacy in kids while also building self-esteem, self-worth, and a sense of belonging. And we do that through author visits. And we get these volunteers, and they're like, I love kids. And I'm like, great. But they assume that they're going to be working with the kids. And it's like, no, like the volunteer, there is no working with kids. First of all, it's an assembly that we do. And number two, it's like most of my stuff I need is admin. It's just, you connecting me to schools, you connecting me fundraising and coming to events. And I'm talking to my other nonprofits, and they're like, oh my God, every time people want to volunteer and they want to work with the kids or they want to work with the animals, whatever, organization I'm working with. They go, and that's when we lose people, because then they sit down and they're like, oh, they just want me to just send emails. And I'm like, no, but that's such a big help for me. Like, but they don't want to do that part. What they want to go straight to the top. Like how do you function and deal with teams or work with teams that want to go straight to the top instead of those little steps that then, as working their way up? Does that make sense?
I could see a couple things going on here. And one, you might have somebody coming in who just has no interest in doing that other task. It could be if you have a developmental path where you're like, hey, if you come on board and you help us kind of streamline some of the administrative stuff, that'll create, let's just say, I'm just making this up, like maybe that would create organizational capacity for someone to be able to come and help out at some interactions with children, at some events or something like that. And so you could, kind of how your capacity to, or your ability to kind of be candid about the skills that you need and the organizational kind of status right now and how you need that skill set to bring you to the next level. But if you had that trajectory, kind of building that into the sales pitch, but also thinking about how kind of you also want to be able to deliver what you've within reason. Hey, we're a growing organization. There's going to be some adaptation, but say, hey, look, so how you communicate, I think that environment is going to be part of it. I'm picking up what you're putting down. People want to have that connectivity with kids. I would argue there are also some people who prefer the administrative task. They're maybe more introverted and they want to be connected with bringing meaningful things to children and some of the other stuff you're doing. And so there may be an opportunity space to advertise, like someone want to be connected with a nonprofit. And I think maybe selling the purpose of the organization so people can get that, if that's the meaningfulness for them to be getting involved, but also that couple options. You try to target people that have that administrative specific background and interest, but that's connected to the purpose of the organization, which is maybe connected to their individual purpose. Secondarily is being able to, if the trajectory is feasible, like, hey, we need your help in this administrative space to get us to a place where you can do more of that interaction, kind of showing them, visualizing the opportunity space if they're willing to put that in.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. I like that, the incentives. Actually, it's funny you said that because yesterday me and another nonprofit were talking about something, and he was like, man, crickets half the time, or they just don't show up, or they stop showing up, and he's like, now I put incentives behind things, and it's a game changer. And I was like, oh, interesting. And I wanted, since you teach candidates, for special operations to mentally prepare, what do you feel like the number one mindset mistake is that people make?
First, can I go back to the fourth
Please.
kind of theme that I was going to cover off, mindfulness,
Yes, please,
purpose,
please.
context. The
Yes.
fourth thing I was going to cover there is opportunity space. And that's really the
Okay.
lifestyle stuff, right? Like if you were
Okay.
going into a medical appointment, yes, I do work for the VA. This is just Dustin. This is not on behalf of the VA. Regardless of where you go to your provider, that's a 30-minute appointment, a 1-hour appointment. While there are meaningful things that can happen there. There's 24 hours in a day. I like to tell folks, hey, what you're doing with the other 23 and a half or 23 hours a day is going to be the way that you manage your lifestyle is going to be the biggest impactor of your health, well-being, and performance. Like you're holding the keys to the castle. And so
Yeah.
when we get into like the special operations, kind of the mental performance stuff, that's an aspect of it because while let's say have a class on self-efficacy that gets into the stuff I was talking about, and it can go and say, okay, what are the tasks for your selection, right? Like, let's
Mhm.
break that down kind of so you can have respect for your current status and start kind of building a trajectory of how you would develop that skill set in a meaningful way, looking at that and kind of calibrating what you need to do and where you're at. But really where I would start, I would take a look at some of the lifestyle stuff. A lot of people don't know things like nutrition, movement, sleep, mind body connection.
Can I just, I don't mean to, I just
Yeah.
want to do just right now, like right before we get on this call, I'm doing a Battle of the Cakes event for my nonprofit. And I also have this tea party and stuff like that. And I am really big into health and wellness because I just feel like if you have your health, I mean, you just, you're rich. I just, you can do 1,000 different things. But when you are sick, it sure just focus on one thing, and that's getting better, right? And a lot of the times we put ourselves into that sickness by not realizing because we don't understand health, and we don't we don't even want to try and understand it. So I was like, literacy, it's with children, all this stuff. I was like, we're going to just do some clean eating. And I was like, let's not go I went a little too extreme and I had to kind of back it up a little bit. But I was like, at least no artificial food dyes, no seed oils, no bleached products. So no bleached flour and sun sugars and stuff like that. But the rest of it, fair game. I can't tell you how much pushback I'm getting on the fact that people are like, I don't want to participate because of this clean thing. And I'm just saying to myself, like, I am just blown away by the people that just don't want to, or like I've been riding my bike like just a mile into town to take my meetings, deciding to ride my bike. Can't even tell you how many people are like, wow, like it's so hot out. I can't believe it. It's a mile up the road. What, all these excuses that people are making. And I'm just saying to myself, like, I just also feel it's the one thing that gets my blood boiling, and I really shouldn't care. Like in fact that if you want to not care about your health, but at the same time, it affects me because then we have all these things in place that people just, I can't go to a restaurant because people like you don't care about what they're using. So, of course, they're going to use crap, cheap products.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it bothers me because it affects me. And I just feel like people just don't want to educate themselves in that matter until they need to, till it's like, and then at that point, it's like, well, it's maybe a little too late.
Yeah, I see that sometimes, where I still appreciate if somebody says, hey, they get a rough wake up call, like they've got, pre-diabetes or diabetes, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, or kind of the stack of difficult situation. They're like, okay, I need to take action. It's certainly a lot easier to move to kind of redirect when you take early decisive action on that for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's tough. So this is where like from a health coaching standpoint, I'm a board certified health coach. Like a lot of that focus is like finding somebody's purpose and trying to get them to anchor on something that so they have that kind of anchor, and then find something that someone's ready, willing, and able to do. And this is different polar extremes. If I've got somebody who's an aggressive special operations candidate versus somebody who has, let's say, some kind of multiple health problems and are looking to like, they're not working out, they're not moving, they're looking to start. I'm giving that person the ability to, it's going to be something they're ready, willing, and able to do. And they're going to pick, we're kind of, that coaching process is helping them to choose something that they're ready to start doing, whether it's like, hey, I'm going to start looking at sleep or I'm going to start looking at
Mm-hmm.
nutrition. I think the tough part is it's frustrating where sometimes they don't have that awareness. And what I've found, Gina, a lot of times is people that just don't know. Despite we have this environment now with AI and information at all of our fingertips, but I encounter quite a few folks that they're not familiar with the basics of sleep, the basics of exercise, nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
They really aren't. So a lot of it's kind of like I try to, so if people are interested, create some of the baseline education just to get people like, because they were like, oh wow, I didn't know that. And
So,
so
can I just ask you, do you, for our listeners that are listening that are like, oh my gosh, I really want to know the basics and stuff like that, do you do coaching where people can like where I'm going to have your link and stuff like that in this episode, but I want to know, like, do you do anything with one-on-ones, or do you do trainings that people can join, or lives or anything like that, for those listeners out there that are like, this sounds like something I need?
I'm looking at currently. I do a really people can reach out to my email if they want, if they're interested in one-on-one work. I've got a small number of one-on-one folks that I'm working with. I will certainly update you if you'd like. I'm looking at maybe
Yes.
some targeted times where I'll do either some additional online kind of based presentations, either pre-recorded, or I've got some mental performance stuff. I'll update you. I'm kind of in a flux at work right now where I'm handling a couple different roles and planning the next phase of this stuff. But
We
I've
could
got
even do a follow-up. When you're ready, we could even do a follow-up episode for those that are listening that are like really intrigued with all this and want to know more. And we could also do an article on the Substack for those that are following, because I think, you're talking about the basics and you're talking about people don't know. Like, I just had a phone call with someone today and we were talking about like chicken and like organic, not organic. And I go, well, is it air chilled? And they were like, didn't know. And I was like, hey, that was me a couple months ago. Like, I didn't know that, if it's not air chilled, it's processed in bleach. And here I am eating this chicken. Doesn't matter if it's organic or not. And it's processed in bleach, it's processed the same way. And,
yeah.
it's just little things like that, that like, we don't know. Well, I feel like that's a little bit more, it just seems so simple. But, just understanding the basics of sleep, of movement. We hear about it all the time, but it's another thing to understand, your body, setting that rhythm, what works for you in sleeping, and for me, I'm all about testing things out. But, and going back to the teammates and stuff like that, I wanted to ask you in terms of like training people, because sometimes people are like, oh, like I have to train this person, and then they just leave, or their retention, they're leaving, or things like that, or they don't do it well and I have to do it anyway. Like, what do you have for people too, in terms of, as we're talking more about teamwork and understanding all sorts of stuff, like training people and the time that you have to put into it? Because sometimes people are like, I just don't even want to put in the time. It's more time for me.
I mean, like in terms of training your teammates or people as a leader or stuff like that. I mean, I would say
Yeah, yeah,
that's it's tough, and
like your teammates, it's one thing in special ops, like you're together. It's like, you're in it for a certain amount of time, and with work, I could quit at any time. My people can leave me at any time. It's a different thing, and I'm curious in terms of translating into the civilians listening.
So I would say this is a generalized statement, but it travels to, we can put it into a lot of these different areas. If you want return on investment, you have to invest. If you want to have a
Mm-hmm.
better body composition, you got to look at how am I moving, how am I eating, how am I, kind of how am I interacting with my environment.
Okay.
If I want to have, if I need to have teammates that have a better outcome, that have, a higher depth of skill, that know how to interact in my organization, that meet, they're not aligning with my organizational values, that doesn't mean you're going to have to stay, and because I'm a big proponent of that 7 to 9 hours of sleep and taking care of yourself. So that doesn't mean you got to work till midnight every night, but you might have to lean in a little bit deeper to develop the relationship, understand the person, or to prepare someone, or to kind of get them into that training process. You may have to invest more to get somebody up to that level to really to
Mm-hmm.
get the ROI. I think there's a lot, especially in our day and age where everything is at the fingertips. And I
Yes.
love Chat GPT. I love some of the the nuanced things that we can do, but we also have this the instant gratification and the kind of the life is easy. I don't want to walk. I don't want to get out in the heat like you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
and I can just Chat GPT it. And ultimately, if you want
Or trust
results,
the chat, by the way. It's like, it makes mistakes and it's like, oh, it's good enough,
exactly. So this may seem overly simplistic. A lot of things really come down to the basics. If you want to have a better teammate, if you want to have a better culture environment, you're going to have to lean in and put some effort into it. You can't just show up and be like, this team sucks. Like you've got to say, okay, how can I get into the mechanics? It seems like kind of a wise ass statement, but I confront that stuff pretty often where we're like, hey, I've worked with folks that are the team's been together 10, 15, 20 years, and they've got internal conflict that might have been taking place, and they like, okay, we've been here for a long time. Have folks ever had a barbecue? They ever had lunch? Have they ever, had a coffee together? No, we don't do personal stuff. I'm like, look, you're investing, if you're at a job, you're there 8 hours a day, typically, sometimes longer, more time with those people than you spend with your family. And so, again, but a lot of people just get right down to their task. They don't consider how much their task relies on the network that they're inserted into, and they don't invest in that network, and they reap the rewards, or the opposite of that. Hopefully, I didn't go too much off the
No, that
question
was
there.
great. You did mention the basics a couple of times. Can you talk about how one gets down to those basics? Like, how do you discover what is the basics and what's and to build from there?
Are we talking about lifestyle? Are we talking about, I guess we could translate that to if there's a skill set for your nonprofit, if we're talking about shooting, and, moving in dynamic environments, you need to know how to operate the pistol at the most basic level, or the rifle, and from a static position. And you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And then maybe you're doing, let's say, magazine changes, or you're shooting more than one target from a static position. Then maybe you're moving. There's that kind of the fundamentals of utilizing that equipment or doing that task. I like to think of it, the task is basic, but the environment that you do it in, the task becomes more complex, but the environment that you do the task in also gets more complex. So start out with simple task, simple environment.
Gotcha.
And then
Okay.
simple task, simple environment, and then you can look at scaling up if the task has an advanced level, or then just scale up the environment if the task doesn't have any other adaptations. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Especially, I mean, it translates to the business world too. It's like, break it down. Yeah. And same thing with the lifestyle. It's like break it down into movement, break it down into eating, break it down into sleep. That makes a lot of sense, and then figure out what works. Let's go back to the challenge in terms of mentally. What would you feel like people make a mistake, or the biggest mistake, or no, I shouldn't say biggest, the most common mistake is better phrasing, people make in terms of mindset?
A lot of this connects with the action. You fall to the level of your training so that people get into
Mhm.
a selection type scenario. You can have part of having a good mindset is doing the things that help you to create that good mindset. You can have a mindful practice, you can visualize yourself doing a difficult task, but if you don't take some of the actions to build that resiliency, to build the physical and mental skills, visualizing yourself. Now, yeah, we could talk about the neurological components of visualization, of like throwing a ball or doing something. So there's some value to real value, even physiologically, visualizing stuff. But my point is, I think there's a delta between people wanting to do something and maybe even visualizing to some degree, but they're not really going in and putting in the effort to prepare themselves for that task. And you're not always going to be able to prepare yourself for everything, but the more that
Mhm.
you can hit those two areas, like develop an understanding and a level to execute this basic task. Land navigation is an easy one. Like, there's basic, can I read a map? Can I do a compass? Can I do an intersection, resection, other stuff you can do there. Then you've got the environment. Can I do it in day? Can I do it at night? Can I cross a river? Can I do it in snow? You know what I mean? You start stacking
Yeah.
these things. So the more you practice those things, if I'm really good at all the variables that constitute land navigation, and I've practiced that a ton on my own on the weekend, at night, etc. I know how to use the equipment. Now we're getting into what's called dual process theory and like intuition. Imagine if you learn to drive a vehicle and you've never driven a standard vehicle. At first, you're like
Mhm.
worrying about the clutch, you're worrying about when you shift gears. After you practice, you can talk on the phone, drink coffee, and do it at the same time. So the more that we take this hard thing we want to do and we build intuitive capacity, as we build, now I know how to do a lot of these other mechanics intuitively. and in an increasingly difficult environment. Now, when I encounter some sort of difficulty along the way, I've built some mental and physical capacity to be able to mentally handle this problem set that I've got and physically to navigate it because I've already built up some kind of resilience within that task and within that environment. And that'll translate again, like I was saying, self-efficacy to similar stuff. Doing the stuff, I hate to oversimplify it, but if people end up going to these training programs and they just haven't put in as much time and effort as they need to in advance, it's not rocket science. I mean, the basic tasks that you're going to need to do, you can Google these up. There's plenty of these podcasts where like, here's what they do at Special Forces selection, but people that fail aren't out there doing that, kind of developing the task and the environment, because that gives you capacity to maneuver to the, when you can do those knowns pretty well, it gives you mental and physical capacity to go to the unknowns when those pop up, and they will. That's part of the process too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I want to talk about, I love your do hard things with a smile on your face, and I remember, I mean, we've had so many people on this show, and a lot of them talk about how when it just sucks, you just got to laugh. You just got to smile through it, and you just got to it's one of the best ways to get through it. And I remember when I was training in the Navy SEAL prep program, and I was miserable. I was like, I don't know how anyone finds this fun. Like, they found it fun, and I'm like, this is terrible. But in order for me to keep going, like, we would be running, and they just smoked me. And on the way back, I would just be coming up, where to turn around. So they'd all be seeing me, and I'd be running like with a huge smile on my face because I used to make myself smile because I was so miserable and I wanted to quit. And everyone was always like, they would always say afterwards, they're like, yeah, you're always smiling. I'm like, it's the only way I'm getting through this, guys. It was like the only way. Oh, but how do you? I love that. I mean, it really, really does work in terms of doing hard things, but you just don't want to sometimes. You just like want to be in the miserable and the complaining. You have to force yourself. What do you got for us in the terms of, and now why did you, why is this one of the things that you, I guess, a philosophy in a way is what I would say is and what you're teaching people?
So, I mean, certainly that you can see that at the teammate side. If you come and you work with me every day and I'm just like pissed off all the time or I'm gruff, that's going to impact our human interaction. So it's good from a teammate perspective. It also makes you feel good. If you look at physiological, like hormone release, like when you smile, it's got a positive kind of waterfall. And just looking around and saying, hey, look, I'm out under the sunshine. Like, I woke up today. There are plenty of people who don't have the ability to be out even walking around, or, that aren't here. Somebody else, like just the fact that I'm up for the sunrise today, I'm breathing air, I'm outside. It's a blessing. Sometimes you have to step back a little bit further. That's one thing I also would suggest. If your head's too far down in the sand or in the water, you can only see what's going on right there. Sometimes you have to take even a mental and emotional pause and step back, even for a millisecond, step back out of it and be like, okay, what do I have to be grateful for? What's going on? That's a good time to reach back, depending on how tough of the situation is. If you've got that, purpose you can anchor on, that's something else to be like, okay, like I've got a few young kids. I'm like, I can see myself, giving one of my kids a hug or playing with them, teaching them a new skill, or like, it's like you can be thankful for what's around you, above you, below you, your teammates, your whatever else is driving your purpose, and then get back in. That's also a rep, kind of when you get reps to being grateful is a great thing to get reps in, whether it's journaling, you could do like a sentence a day. It takes 10 seconds. I'm grateful for my teammate who, made me a coffee today. You're going to feel good if you put some reps on that, I promise. And then it's like anything. If you put reps to it, then when you're in a shitty situation, you can dive into it. You can access it much easier. If you don't ever do something, you're certainly not going to be able to access it when you're in a crappy situation. So you need to do it on a good day and on a medium day and on a bad day. That way it's accessible when you get to the rough times. That's what I'd say.
Wow. I will say, I'm really grateful that I started where I started in this, because unfortunately we didn't even get to I'm curious on what drew you into being a Green Beret, and you were there for so long and all the stuff that you've done. I have so many questions for you, but it is an hour show, and I just feel like our listeners, myself, I got so much value out of everything that you said. And I would love to bring you back and when you're ready to move forward with trainings and all that stuff. But I do need to ask, I know we touched base on so many stuff, but do you have advice? This is like one of my wrap up questions that I give to people is, what do you have for us to do on a daily basis to help strengthen our mindset for when those inevitable challenges come our way?
Not sure if you would expect this one or not. I would say if I had to pick one thing, I would say your sleep. And I know it seems odd. If you take away someone's sleep, it's like cutting your matchstick. The more sleep you take away, the more of your matchstick you lose. Your cognitive, your mental, your emotional matchstick. And so yeah, there's times where we need to be able to go in and perform on less sleep. But if you're training to be your best self, I highly encourage you to look at that 7 to 9 hours of sleep, your sleep environment. It's like running, if you want to have that Ferrari, you want to run it without the oil change, with a slick set of cheap tires on it. That's my number one. Take a look at your sleep. I promise just about anybody can make some small adjustments in it, and it really significant factor in your decision making. Honestly, your immune response, your health, like the whole shoot match, but specifically mental and decision making, etc.
Do you have a sleep routine?
Yep. So I go to bed. I have 3 young kids, but I go to bed. My wife and I would go to bed with the kids. Yeah, shenanigans happen, but make a point to dial down, stay off the devices about an hour in advance. Try to get my kids, they're all getting into reading age, so sometimes we'll do a little reading. Last night we played Uno. That got a little bit more energetic than to dial down the sleep environment, but it was cool. It was worth it. So anyway, try to power it down, stay off the screen. I do a sleep mask. I highly recommend folks try a sleep mask. Why? Yeah, dark environment's great. It's a cheaper way to get the environment dark. Everybody's touching a device nowadays. I think the biggest benefit, this is anecdotal from Dustin here, but N of one, but you put that mask on and obviously you can't look at your phone when you have a sleep mask. So it's a decision. My kids know when the mask goes on, it's like it's time, so it's a decision point. Mask goes on, it's game time. It helps you stay away from the device and you get a little more quicker melatonin release because the darker environment. I use a mouth tape as well, which is another signal, like not going to talk anymore. We could get into like physiology of breathing and why nose breathing is healthy, and check with your clinician. I'm not saying that's a fit for everybody, but those are my signals. I plan to ramp down an hour ahead, but I put the mask, I put the tape, and it's like game time. Let's do it. Lights out.
Yeah. People always are like, man, the moment your head hits the pillow, you're a great sleeper. I'm like, I trained for this. It's like there were moments in my life where I was not a very good sleeper and I'm like pacing all night. Like it was rough. I'm like, I trained for this. I have the glasses, the red light glasses that go on like as the sun goes down. So that way, if I am going to do some computer work, like, I have these glasses on and then I'm like, I have a marketing director who's like, I go all night. And I'm like, that's great. I don't, 8:00. If you email me, you're not getting a response, every once in a while, it happens where I'm in the computer doing a deadline that, especially when it's podcast due date. But aside from that, I have these hard outs and I do a little bit of movement before bed. And then the moment my head hits that pillow, it just knows like it's time to go. Like that's it. And I will say it's like I wake up and my family is always like so energetic in the morning. And I go, I sleep well. Like that's it. Like I wake up once, 3 a.m. I wake up, I have a sip of water, I go right back to bed. That's it. And I fall right to sleep. It's just, I agree with you in the sleep part. It's so crucial. Because when I'm not, like, especially at nighttime, I'm just not, my body knows it's time to sleep. We look forward to that. It's a recharge because I am so exhausted throughout the day. Like I make sure I get myself so physically exhausted that when my head hits the pillow, it's ready to go. So I look forward to it. Right. And if I have to go a little bit later, my body is just, it's not happy. It's just, it needs that rest, so yeah, you're spot on with that. And no one's 7 episodes into this podcast and no one has mentioned that one on the final question. So that's definitely going to be a book chapter. Thank you so much for that. And thanks for being on the show. You're really fantastic. I really look forward to having you back.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Yeah. Think about those relationships. Think about resilience. They connect. Think about how you're getting to know your teammates and taking care of them. Really appreciate your time, Gina. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. And everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member for those bonus chapters, especially this coming one about sleep. And I will see you guys all next Wednesday. Thank you.